Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker. And before I get to my guest, I just remind you all that this month's book giveaway is unexpected. The Backstory of Finding Elizabeth Smart and Growing Up in the Culture of an American Religion, written by Chris Thomas, who's been on my program. And he was, in the forward is Elizabeth Smart. He's good friends with the Smart family. He was the spokesman for the family when Elizabeth Smart went missing. So he was on all the national TV programs and wrote this really, really good book. So just in the description, send it to my email, mormonbookreviews@gmail.com. Make sure that in the subject heading, you say book contest and leave me your name and your full address. U.S. residents only. That is the May. Get yours in before the end of May. That is the May drawing. All right, folks, I have this really great guest on. He's an evangelical Christian who's actually been encountering the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints and the broader restoration from quite some time, and actually had a pretty well-known blog around that was called LDS and Evangelical Conversations. And he's also been, again, Conversations, LDS and Evangelicals. Isn't that a nice idea? What a great concept. And so either way, Tim McMahan, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So Tim reached out to me and said, I think we should have a conversation. And that conversation led to me inviting him to come on my program to tell his fascinating story. And really, I think what I found so interesting is that really members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have impacted you through conversations, but actually they impacted you on one of your initial ones where you kind of were like I'm the know-it-all Christian apologist. And we're gonna talk about Tim's life story. I want to touch on that, but I kind of want to start it off with the story of you engaging two missionaries and how that kind of changed the trajectory of your life. Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
Sure, yeah. So I live in Southern California, and I had gone through an apologetics program at Biola University. Big fan of Biola. Big fan of Craig Hazen, who runs that program.
And that's Bible Institute of Los Angeles. That's what it should be.
No, it used to be Bible Institute of Los Angeles. Now it's just a nonsense word.
Oh.
And sometimes the jokes were that it's the Bridal Institute of Los Angeles, but I think they've moved past that as well. So this was well after college. I was coming out of my apartment. I had a meeting I was going to, and some LDS missionaries stopped me on the street as I was walking my car. And by stop me, I mean they accosted me. They were like 50 yards away. Like they were I couldn't see the whites of their eyes, kind of thing. And they yell at me. They're like, wait. And they come running up to me. And I'm like, I got to go somewhere. This is not a good way to start a conversation. Like, what are they doing? And I wanted to put a stone in their shoe for them, to walk away with something from the conversation. I knew that it couldn't be a long conversation because I was literally getting in my car, and they were out of breath from running to catch up to me. And so I was trying to engage them on the burning on the bosom. Is a personal spiritual experience enough to justify a belief? And I didn't have enough time. We didn't really even we didn't know each other's names, but I'm trying to engage them on this a little bit, and they see that, oh, this isn't going well. This isn't somebody we've got an opportunity with to teach later. And they say, oh, that's very nice. We have to go. And they literally, I'm not kidding you, they literally sprinted away from me. And my jaw just hit the ground. I couldn't, what just happened? These guys just literally ran away from me. I'm not a big, intimidating guy. I don't have tattoos on my face or the piercings all over. I don't look like I'm going to rip somebody's head off. So to have somebody run away from me was just completely, it's foreign to everybody, but it really had never happened to me. And I just determined in that moment, I am never, ever going to be in a situation where I'm talking about the things about God and somebody feels justified in running away from me. Whether it was my fault or their fault, it was mostly their fault. I'll take some blame, but mostly their fault. But nobody should ever feel like the you know what the best thing to do in this moment is to run. Like I'm not going to have a conversation with somebody where that happens. So I'm going to learn your name. We're going to sit down. We're going to get to know something about each other so that you at least know that, hey, it would be really awkward if I got up and ran away right now.
Yeah.
And that, that's just kind of, that's kind of turned my approach in general in engaging Latter-day Saints or anybody really about, when you want to have a spiritual conversation, I want to get off on a good foot.
That's excellent. And so it kind of changed your trajectory, your approach to say, you know what, I don't want to ever have a conversation where the reaction is they're going to run away.
Right.
And I think that's such a cool, I think that says a lot about you as a human being, because there are some people, some Christian apologists that would be like, hold that up as a trophy. Look what I did. They ran away from me. Or some charismatic Christian says, I'm so full of the Holy Ghost, they ran away from me. And I'm like, no, maybe because you may, that may not be the right way to look at it, And
right. I get really frustrated when people they brag on somebody or they brag on themselves and they say, oh, I'm on the blacklist, like the missionaries won't come to my house anymore. I'm like, no, you got it all wrong. Yeah. You want the missionaries to come to your house. Like they want to talk about God with you. That means you want them coming to your house because you want to talk to God about God with them, right? Like
that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you have people that want to talk about Jesus, they want to talk about God, and you as a Christian are going to slam the door in their face, you're going to mistreat them. That makes no sense at all. It's not Christian at all. And that's
or it's even to scare them away, to make them think there's no point in talking with you. Like, you want them to keep coming back. That doesn't mean you don't engage with them. Doesn't mean you don't ever disagree with them, but you don't want to be blacklisted. Never get blacklisted.
No, you don't want that. And plus, this is the thing. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are some of the nicest people in the world. So you're actually missing out on engaging with some truly nice people.
Most of them, but yes.
We know we got plenty to say on our side too. We're not all many
guilty as charged.
Exactly. So before we actually talk about your engagement with the restoration through your blog, which was around for quite a while and was very influential and was a conversation starter, I just maybe want to talk a little bit about your past. You actually were raised by missionary parents and spent a lot of your time in the Philippines, and you also had some engagement with the LDS in the context of the Philippines as well. Maybe just talk a little bit about your background and tell us all about your time growing up in the Philippines as well.
Great. I love that. So yes, my parents were missionaries in the Philippines, and we went there when I was in 4th grade, and I was there all the way through high school. I actually came back to the States to go to college. And before we went, our arrival there was a little bit delayed. The Philippines is an officially Catholic nation. They have a state-sponsored church is the Catholic Church, and somebody in charge said no missionaries are coming into the country for a number of years. Somebody was just a fervent Catholic, and they're like, nobody gets in who doesn't already have a visa. So we and a number of people, including Latter-day Saints, could not get into the country for a couple of years. And then, whoever was in charge, something changed, and we got our visa. And all the Latter-day Saint missionaries got their visas as well. And suddenly, the LDS Church was going gangbusters.
Now, what year was this around?
1983, 1984.
So this when Marcos was the president of the country.
Right. Yeah. So I was there for the revolution where he was deposed, and I think I was there for 6 coups d'etats and 1 revolution. People in the United States, they have snow days. We used to have coup days where we couldn't go to school because somebody had declared a coup.
Wow.
That's a true story. So the LDS Church, they were going gangbusters. They were building ward houses all over the country, and they were sending in a ton of missionaries. And let me tell you about these ward houses. They were beautiful. They were built with the best construction available in the country, up to American standards. Just pristine parking lots, great buildings, white. They were the same everywhere you went. They were They really, really love basketball. And what you won't see in the Philippines very often is a full basketball court. And we're talking, in the rural parts of the country, in Manila, for sure, there's gymnasiums and things like that. But most of the people are very poor. And all of these ward houses, they had a basketball court. It was a full court basketball court on the best concrete you could lay down in the country. And all of these ward houses had a fence around them. And people would be playing basketball. And then on the outside of the fence, there'd be people around the fences, like watching people play. And they always had the same question. How do I get to play on this basketball court? I want to play on this basketball court. And the answer, at least my understanding was, the answer is become a member of our church. You can play basketball here all the time if you become a member.
Okay, so we had baseball baptisms in the 1960s in England, and you're witnessing basketball baptisms in the Philippines.
Perhaps. Again, I'm a child and I'm not a Latter-day Saint, so I don't exactly know what's going on. But from the outside, this is what I'm seeing. This is what we as Protestant missionaries and their families are all seeing what's going on. The other thing about the Philippines is that they really love Americans and they love American culture. Mm-hmm. If you're anywhere in the United States, you probably know a Filipino immigrant. Good chance, and they're probably a nurse. I was going to tell you something else, but we're going to move on from that because it's not the point. Nursing Filipino nurses is not the point today. The Philippines has 97 different dialects. And so most people think the Filipinos speak Tagalog, and that's just one of the many, many languages they speak there. So to unify the country, the government actually has everybody learn English as the official business language. So in school, everybody in the country is learning English. And all of the Filipinos, they want to practice their English, right? They love Americans and they want to practice English. And so they would want to talk to Americans whenever they can. So the LDS Church is sending all of these young Latter-day Saint missionary young men into the country, and they all speak English. And Filipinos are like, yes, come into my house. Let's talk English. I want to talk English to you. Mm-hmm. And one thing you need to know about Filipino culture is that it's a face-saving culture. And Americans don't have that kind of culture here. When we ask a question, we expect a yes or no answer. And the way we ask questions, Filipinos couldn't say no to those questions just because of the way we were phrasing the question. It would cause shame on them to say no. So you have these American missionaries coming in and posing questions to Filipinos in a way that they can't say no to. And I'm not at all surprised to hear that later Dallin H. Oaks, I think it was Dallin H. Oaks, had to go to the Philippines and shut down a ton of stakes and missions and ward houses because there was nobody in them. And it was just, these two factors, these beautiful basketball courts that are available via baptism, and the inability, or not the inability, the cultural misunderstanding of how to engage Filipino culture in a way to actually provoke long-lasting faith. And of course, there's Filipinos today who are Latter-day Saints who love their faith. I'm not saying that none of them do. I'm just saying that it was no surprise to me that many, many Filipinos were saying yes to baptism and had no intention of actually becoming Latter-day Saints.
Interesting. Okay, that is fascinating. Now, I'm just curious, your parents were missionaries. Were they affiliated with a particular denomination or group?
Yeah, they were with the Church of the Nazarene, which is actually like the Latter-day Saint Church, was a Methodist offshoot, and they were Bible college teachers.
Okay.
So they were training Filipino pastors.
Oh, that is really interesting. Okay. So folks, just, the Nazarenes, they come out of the Wesleyan holiness tradition, which is actually like my friend Christopher Thomas. He's Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. He's of the Pentecostal holiness tradition, just to kind of give you guys a little background on that. And okay, so what was it? I do want to ask you, what was it like growing up in the Philippines? And two, this is the thing. I have a cousin who's in charge of like one of the main mission organizations in the Philippines. And he raised his kids. His kids are they're white American kids, but they're Filipinos. And they actually feel more comfortable in that culture than they do there. And actually they want to get back to the Philippines. What was it like? Was there a lot of culture shock growing up in the Philippines? That's your world. You're essentially a Filipino in one sense. And then maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when we went, I was 9 and I did not want to go.
Okay. 9 years old. So okay.
I knew enough about being an American kid to know that I didn't want to move to a foreign country.
Okay.
And my brothers were much younger, and actually my youngest brother was born there. So it was a little bit different for them, but I knew what I had in the United States, and I wasn't interested. When I got there, I adapted, and I went to this great school for missionary kids. It's called Faith Academy. It's actually the largest missionary kids school in the world. People from other Asian countries send their kids to boarding school there. And I was in boarding school. And I really, really appreciate having grown up in the Philippines. I love getting to know a different culture. I love the expansive view of the world I have now. I love knowing what actual poverty is. You know, I don't love seeing poverty, but I love knowing how things really are in the world for most people.
Yeah.
At the time, the Philippines was a hard place to live. Things are different now, things have modernized, but it was, you know, it's very hot there. It's very humid. There were a lot of coups. Have I mentioned that?
Yes.
There's a lot of political upheaval. So I decided I didn't want to live there. I would love to go back and visit, and I have visited, but you know, I have a lot of love for Filipino people, but actually living in the country was a very difficult thing, and something, you know, God has not called me back to.
You know, it was interesting.
But I wanted to mention, I'm not Filipino. And there's this thing for missionary kids. There's a new term called third culture kid. Okay. And it's just an excellent opportunity to tell people about it. So if you're an expatriate, if your parents work for the State Department, sometimes if they work for the military, or if they're missionaries, or they're just, you know, your parents work for some business that works overseas, you gain, you're not your home culture, which for me was the United States, because you don't grow up in the United States. You don't experience everything that American kids do. And you're not your host culture, because I'm not Filipino. I'm clearly not Filipino. I learned quite a bit of Tagalog, but I'll never be Filipino because I'm not from there. I didn't grow up in a Filipino family. So I'm this third thing. I have a third culture, and I'm a third culture kid. And even with third culture kids, things are different from me than the kids who grew up in a different part of the country, or who've been there longer or shorter than me, or who speak Tagalog better than I did or worse. So even for myself, like I have a lot of in common with other third culture kids, but not everything.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah, you know, actually getting back to my cousin, I Zoomed with him like a year and a half ago, and because he's really interested in my project. And he's, like I said, he's originally they went there as missionaries. They literally would go to rural villages and start a church. And then once the people in that community were able to take it over, they would go, and so they were living in rural Philippines. Now he's actually oversees this mission for the entire country now, and he's based in Manila. He actually lives just down the road from the temple there.
Oh,
but he had told me, you know, he observed Mormon missionaries in the Philippines, and he said, Steve, he said, I have to tell you, he actually has a lot of respect for the LDS Church and for the work that they do. He says, and he remembered he was talking to one of his guys in the organization. He says, you know, you can say what you want about them, but you know, during the heat of the day, when everybody else is indoors, there's only 2 people walking around, and it's usually the Mormon missionaries. He says they're so dedicated, they work so hard. He says, I have to give credit to them, their work ethic. They're really dedicated. Now, he says it's so what he's doing is is so different what the LDS church does, because he literally they live in the community. He actually helps start churches, and it's a lifetime commitment that he's making as a missionary.
Right.
It's a completely different thing, but he does respect them in many ways, and he's not as hostile towards them as maybe typical people are. Maybe talk a little bit about that as well. That they, you mentioned there are faithful members of the church, and these, it's amazing the work that they do. You have to, in one sense, say you can admire that the work that they do, in one sense, the effort they put into it.
Yeah, I would say most Protestant missionaries had a very low opinion of LDS missionaries, and in part because of their success, and their success meant that they were sheep stealing. The LDS missionary approach, you really kind of have to have some knowledge of the Bible and Christianity to begin with, to really understand this idea that there's another prophet, there's other scriptures. The church isn't quite as successful in Japan, right? Because the foundation of Protestant or Catholic Christianity isn't as fervent or isn't as rich. So for evangelical missionaries, there was this feeling like, look at all this work we did. Like, there are people who go and teach people to be literate, and they teach them, they put their own language into a written form so that eventually they can read the Bible. Like, they're spending 15 to 30 years developing these unknown languages into written form so that they can translate the Bible and teach the people how to read so they can read the Bible. And then you have a couple of 19-year-olds come in who are like, oh, that's a cool piece of scripture. Here's another one. And like, look at all this work I had to do. And then you come in here and tell them this, like, right? Like, of course you're going to be frustrated.
Oh, sure.
And you come in with all this money too, right? Like, you come in with this money and you build this beautiful church out of nothing. Like, meanwhile, the Protestant missionary has toiled away sometimes in a shack, in the same kind of living conditions as the people who live in these rural villages. So, I think you could understand the frustration.
But that's the thing though too, is I always tell people, said we get mad at the LDS for coming into our territory. But I said, just imagine how the Jesuits feel about the Protestants, because they're the ones that laid the groundwork that we did the exact same thing that the LDS church is doing. So
yeah, you were absolutely correct, and that did not escape me as I described it, that it was a Catholic nation. Like, the Catholics got so frustrated at some point they banned Protestants from coming in too. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just think we all have to be humble too sometimes about this, and look at it from that perspective as well, because the Catholics are like, look at the groundwork we laid out. Okay. So right. And everything. So, well, any more about the Philippines you want to talk about?
No, I think that pretty much covers what I want to say. I mean, I could talk a lot about the Philippines, but it's not really relevant to.
So I wanted to kind of transition to this idea of you starting this blog. Now, you had mentioned to me beforehand that you wanted to also have a conversation that you and your wife had attending a temple open house. Maybe talk about that first, and then let's talk about the blog.
Yeah, so the temple open house actually leads into the blog. My wife and I were newly married, and a temple opened here in where we live in Orange County, California, and a friend of mine had heard about it. Hey, it's open. Okay, let's go check it out. Let's go see it. And we went through it, beautiful space. And our tour guide was really, really invested in us. Like, in my wife and I in particular, out of the whole group. And afterwards there was like in the fellowship hall, or there was, snacks and punch and things like that. And he kept returning to us over and over again. And eventually we're like, well, yeah, if you want to talk about God with us, come on over. Like, and he's like, yes, I want to bring the missionaries over to your house. And later he told us, hey, we were told that when we take people on these tours, we're going to know which people have the Holy Spirit with them. And you'll be able to tell. And I could tell right away that you and your wife had the Holy Spirit. And we're like, well, yes, we do. Like, you were not wrong there, sir. So we had him and his wife and a couple missionaries come over, and the missionaries would come on their own. And the conversations I wanted to have, the missionaries just they couldn't have them, in part because of their age and their own lack of knowledge of their own faith, to be honest. The two guys that we met with the most, neither of them are Latter-day Saints today. They were there to kind of be converted themselves. Very nice guys, really, really like those guys. I'm friends with both of them on Facebook today. That's how I know where their faith journey is going. But I couldn't have the conversations I wanted to have with them. I read I knew that, hey, if I'm going to have these conversations, I need to know something about their faith. So I read the Book of Mormon in like 2 weeks, and I think neither of them had actually read it, or they had barely read it all themselves. And so I started getting online to have conversations with Latter-day Saints. I wanted to have deeper conversations that the missionaries just couldn't provide. So I went looking for them, and I found a number of message boards, and I found the FAIR message board, whatever it was called at the time, or whatever it's called today. The name changes frequently, but at the time I think it was called FAIR. And I got really frustrated on that message board, because it was very clear that the moderation dynamics there were two sets of moderation dynamics. There was one for Latter-day Saints, and there was one for people who were not Latter-day Saints. And it wasn't equitable. It wasn't fair. I wasn't cursing at people or saying things I shouldn't say. I wasn't talking about the temple. It's just that you weren't allowed to disagree in the same way. So I was like, I need a different place. And blogging had just kind of started launching out. And I was like, what if I'll start a blog, and I'll just generate my own audience. I'll generate my own community around this blog, so I can talk about the things I want to talk about with people. And I had found a Latter-day Saint. I think I found him on MySpace, and he was open to having conversations. He was intelligent, and I was like, hey, what if we start this blog so that we can have these conversations somewhere else? He's like, okay, yeah, let's try it. And he hung in there for about 2 or 3 months, and I have no idea where he is now. I don't even remember his name. I should go look it up. But I kept running with it, and I found other Latter-day Saints who were willing to write, and I would let them write their own blog posts. And I don't think I ever deleted anybody's comments over any issue ever. Like maybe a few for because they were spam or because they were cursing at some. But even if they were cursing at somebody, I think I would probably just go in and edit it. Like not that a Latter-day Saint would curse, but whatever kind of comments or and I really enjoyed that time. I really enjoyed the conversations that were sparked. Really learned I loved learning about the Latter-day Saint faith, and I loved learning about my own faith. Like, people would pose really good questions, and I'd have to answer them, and I would have to go look, like, what do we mean by this, or why do we do things the way we do? Like, you kind of sometimes you think your church services they were just kind of handed down from God, and no, like. And this actually, one thing that really occurred to me when I attended some Latter-day Saint church services is I walked in and I was like, oh, these people are Methodists. Like, I know what's going on here because of my own Wesleyan background. I recognized that Joseph Smith had a Wesleyan background too, because of the church services, they were Methodist. Like, like the building, the way the pews were shaped, all those things were like, oh, I get this. I understand where this came from. So I really enjoyed having that blog, having those conversations. It went on for about 10 years, and then blogging has kind of gone away. Like, everybody who used to be really big into blogging will tell you blogging's not where it's at anymore. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, that's where all the conversations are happening. And I still have these conversations, but in a much smaller forum with people on Facebook.
So from what years was this blog operational?
I would say 2006 to 2015, 16. It's still there. It's ldstalk.wordpress.com. And at the top of the page, I have a blog highlights post where you can kind of see some of the top conversations, the cream of the crop kind of things that I think came out of that time.
So just tell me a little bit about how the engagement went. Now, I know we had talked before that you actually got a little pushback even from some evangelical apologists about some of the work that you're doing. I imagine you were getting pushback from LDS apologists as well. And then maybe also talk a little bit about maybe just dealing with lay people who maybe are just kind of learning about Mormonism through your blog. Maybe talk on those about those three things.
Great. I'll try to remember those in order. So other evangelicals. So I was highly influenced by, I mentioned Craig Hazen earlier, and then Greg Johnson. And you can look them both up. They both engage with some prominent LDS, some people, some professors, and they really encouraged me to stop thinking of the LDS church as a cult and think of it as a culture. And having the background on the mission field that I had, that resonated. Oh, okay, this is a different culture, and I need to engage them differently than I would engage my own culture. And I had brought that up about how the LDS church, they're engaging the Filipino culture in an American way rather than the Filipino way, and that has consequences. Evangelicals talking to LDS, particularly if they're from Utah, hey, that's a really insulated culture. I need to figure out how to talk to them in a way
I tell Christians, I said, they're a people group. They really are their own culture, and that's how they need to be. And yeah, they're not a cult. They don't look at them as a cult. They're a distinct people group. I tell people, said, Sandra Tanner's still a Mormon. John Dehlin is still a Mormon. They'll always be Mormon. Doesn't matter. That's part of their culture. Yeah.
And I push back on the word cult because it just needs to be defined.
Right.
And the definition I was given of a cult is a sect of a major religion that is no longer orthodox. And that there's some usefulness in that. We need a word for that, and it's better to say unorthodox or heterodox than cult. And it's totally fine to say that, hey, there are groups of Hinduism that aren't orthodox anymore, and there are groups of Islam that aren't orthodox anymore, and there are groups of Christianity that aren't orthodox. They don't hold to a major tenet. They got rid of something that was core to the faith. And I think that perfectly describes the LDS church as compared to historic Christianity. The view of the nature of God is radically different in Mormonism. It's not useful to use the word cult because people think of suicide groups, authoritarian leaders, really destructive, spiritually abusive organizations. And there are reasons that people have used that word in reference to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and certainly elements of the LDS or the Restoration community. I think if you look at Warren Jeffs, it's very easy to use the word cult, but it's just not useful. It's not a useful word because it immediately shuts people's minds off. One, it's ill-defined. We need to agree on what we mean by that word. And two, if somebody's in a cult, what you would call a cult, however you would define it, it's never useful to go up to them and say you're in a cult. Like it just entrenches them more. They're like, oh, I'm persecuted for these beliefs. People don't understand me. They don't understand the benefit I'm getting out of this. They don't understand the beautiful things I see on this. So yeah, it's just not a great word to use.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that you could argue that first century Christianity was a cult because it deviated from Jewish orthodoxy.
Yeah, I think, based on that first definition I gave, absolutely. What Jesus started was a cult of Judaism. if by cult we mean a sect that deviates from a major orthodox position of a major religion. Yeah.
So then also maybe talk about just how regular folk might be engaging in maybe learning. Like I always tell people, I I had somebody come up to me who was related to the prophet, and she said, "Don't tell anybody, but I'm Thomas Monson's niece." And she's like, "I'm learning so much about the history of my church from your channel." Maybe just talk about some of those kind of interactions you might have had as well.
Yeah, there are a number of Latter-day Saints who are like me. So I like to argue. Like my friends who are now watching this, however they might be watching it, whenever they're watching it, they're like, yeah, Tim likes to argue. And there are other Latter-day Saints who like to argue. And it's not that I like to argue, I like to talk about ideas. Really, really love to talk about ideas and get into like what makes an idea work and what are the implications of this idea. And there are lots of Latter-day Saints who are exactly the same. And they're not scared. They're not worried about what might happen to them as they talk about these ideas. They're just interested in getting into it with other people. So I found those other people, and I think a lot of us, like, have you done the Myers-Briggs? I'm an ENTP, and to my shock, years later, I discovered that a number of my LDS friends were also ENTP. Like, it's just funny that's the way it is. So if you ever meet an ENTP, just know that they might be known for liking to argue.
Sure.
And we're not arguing, but we are. So it was great to have a forum for those kind of people. Remind me your question. Like,
just the fact that people might have been learning from your site about the history of their church or about the controversies and stuff like that. Maybe talk to because I imagine just regular folk would just stumble onto your thing and be like, wait, I haven't heard this before, and that kind of thing. Maybe kind of like
that. One of the things I really appreciated seeing LDS. So one of the things I believe that you should be able to do if you are engaging with somebody who disagrees with you is that you need to be able to state their position in a way that they say, yes, that's what I believe.
Steel man. You got to steel man the argument.
Yeah, just and present it in a way that they agree that you know what their position is. And it was so edifying, I think probably on both sides, to have Latter-day Saints be able to describe my view of grace in a way that I'm like, yeah, preach, you got it. Like, or atheists who are former LDS be able to say, oh no, this is the historic view of Christianity. Like, this is why it's actually different. I'm like, yeah, good. Like, we actually, sometimes clarity is more important than agreement. And being able to know that you understand somebody's position is a beautiful and edifying thing. And that's probably one of the things I enjoyed best about having conversations with Latter-day Saints. I for sure got into some trouble with Latter-day Saints because I would flat out say, Mormonism is not Christianity. And this is a big deal, right? Like, everybody wants to claim the name of Christ for good reason. And if somebody in the LDS faith says that they're following Jesus, I'm like, cool, good. I want you to follow Jesus. I'm not saying you're not trying to follow Jesus. What I'm saying is that what your church teaches, what your scriptures teach, what your prophets have taught is different than what I believe and what my church has taught. And it's different enough that you can't say it's the same thing.
Right.
And of course, that's going to, cause some controversy because we all want to fight over how to define the word Christian. So I'm defining Christian this way, and LDS beliefs don't fit into my box. Now, whether or not I get to own the box, that's you know what? Language evolves. I don't necessarily. For example, we've used the word evangelical several times. I've described myself as evangelical. My blog is about evangelicals talking with LDS. I personally don't like the term evangelical anymore. My beliefs haven't changed a lick in the last 5 or 6 years, but I don't want to use the word evangelical because the term has shifted to be what it means today is culturally white, or it means white, conservative, culturally Protestant. And what I say an evangelical is not those three things. It's actually theological. You know, there's some important theological points I want to make about what it means to be an evangelical. And it doesn't at all start with white, politically conservative, or culturally Protestant. I know lots of evangelicals who are none of those three things. So, you know, all that to say is I don't own the word Christian. I've got some vested interest in how to define the word Christian, and I think I've got some historical weight on how to define the word Christian. So I totally understand why Latter-day Saints want to push back on my definition. But you know, that's kind of how the conversation goes, and why it might be contentious sometimes.
And I think it's important that we do just state this is what we can agree on, and then these are the issues that we have problems with. I think that, you know, one of the conversations we had too is like, I tell people, said, you know, it's the cosmology and it's the nature of God within Mormon theology that makes it hard for me to, you know, those are my biggest challenges. There's actually, I can Book of Mormon. I actually love the Book of Mormon because actually it's a thoroughly Protestant book. It's
more Trinitarian than the Bible, like more more
explicitly Trinitarian than the Bible. Exactly. That's absolutely correct. So to me, it's like theologically, it's pretty orthodox. So I say, why don't we? And I even tell people, we can actually have the conversation in a few places. One is the pages of the Book of Mormon. We can also have the conversation within that April 6, 1830 church service, which I tell people was full of this. I went to Dan Vogel once. I said, yeah, and some of those people were spirit-filled. He said, no, all those people were spirit-filled Christians. So it was a room full of spirit-filled, born-again Christians. Them's my people. And I tell you, it's one of those Christian church services probably happening in the country that day, because these were all believers, right? And a lot of churches were full of, you know, deists and agnostics. You know, these were true seekers and believers, Christians in the best sense of the term from the very beginning. So I feel like we can have the conversation there. And then we can have the conversation center around Jesus, because they love Jesus. They follow Jesus. And I say, yeah, you do. And so let's talk about Jesus. Like you said, never walk away from the opportunity to talk about God and Jesus. And so I think these are great places to have these conversations. But then I say, well, I can even say, like, you know, in one sense, within the context of the restoration, we have what are two witnesses. You could say the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And you could actually say, theologically, does this line up with these two witnesses? And so any of the theological developments that come out after that, because again, the fullness of the gospel is contained in the Book of Mormon. That's the claim that's made. So we can use the Book of Mormon and the Bible as lenses that we can look through to engage maybe the later innovations within the tradition of the church. To me, that's much more effective in having conversations with LDS folk about our differences, but also so many similarities, especially in that early church. And the restorationists is all about restoring things back to that first century church. I'm saying, what about restoring to the early days of your church as well? Because to me, that was more of the beginnings of Mormonism is dependent and reliant on evangelicalism, on the Second Great Awakening, on our traditions. It's built on, their foundation is built on our tradition in many ways. I'm sorry, I'm a little long-winded, but that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, I think to the way I would rephrase what you're saying is the LDS Church in its early days, theologically, is not something that most Protestants would have any objection to. It's the latter developments of the Latter-day Saints. Sorry for the pun. Right. That changed the theology and changed the practice of saints, Latter-day Saints, in a way that we wouldn't recognize it as orthodox anymore. And that's where we have that's where we draw those distinctions.
Right. And I think it's important we do that.
Right. And what we probably both agree on is it doesn't help anybody to diffuse those distinctions and say they don't matter or they're not there, they're not real. No, those are real distinctives. and they have consequences. And both Latter-day Saints and historic Christians think that they have real distinctions. They have real consequences to them. They shouldn't be put aside. They shouldn't be said that they don't matter. We're not helping anybody to say that we're all the same, because we're not. Like, our teachings are distinct, and you're harming the beauty of both faiths to say that they're the same when they're not.
I like that. I think I appreciate that very much. I think it's important. State what you believe, stand up for your principles, but also acknowledge where there's differences, but then do it in a Christ-like, loving way, man. You know, I see too much of this on both the LDS side with a particular group of apologists that you kind of mentioned early on, weren't very helpful in your journey, and also with some of these absolutist, hardcore hyper Calvinists in particular, that tend to be very dogmatic in trying to and honestly, I tell people, people don't realize that when members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints look at those people with the blowhorns outside of the temple, wearing the temple clothing, making fun, trying to start fights with people, or they see people that do really excessively nasty things on their YouTube channels, attacking the saints and their beliefs in a way that kind of tries to make them almost satanic. It's if they're a Latter-day Saint and they look at it and say, if that's what Christianity is, or that what evangelical Christianity is, I don't have anything to do with that. And that actually builds a wall between our community so that we can't talk to each other. That's what I love about what I'm doing and what Jeff McCall is doing and David Boyce of 52 Churches of 52 Weeks. And what you've been doing is actually having an engagement. So you're kind of like, we're in many ways the trailblazer to lay the groundwork for a lot of the good things that the real good positive conversations that we're having now.
Yeah, well, I'll humbly defer the the title of trailblazer. But where I stand on kind of these issues is there's all kinds of missiological approaches. Growing up on the mission field, going to school with people whose parents were doing things radically different from one another, I'm for all of it. I'm for anything that's effective. There's no one way to talk to people about Jesus. There's no one way to bring people into the community of faith. There are ways that like we have these things in Southern California called the Harvest Crusades, and I know somebody who doesn't like them. She doesn't like them at all, and yet she found Jesus at one of them. Like she can't deny that this is the thing that actually worked to get her into her own faith. And some things don't resonate with me. They don't fit my personality. The way of presenting the gospel doesn't work for who I am. But I'm like, no, that's fine. If it works for you, good, as long as it's not ineffective. As long, there is no situation or event in the world or conversation or theology out there that gives you an excuse to let go of the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is always applicable. Everything you're doing, the fruit of the Spirit has to be on display. So street preaching, great. But, there's guys at just about every secular college campus in the country who somebody might actually come up to them and say, hey, you've convicted me of my sin, help me. And the only thing the guy knows how to do is yell more to them about their sin. And I'm not saying every street preacher at every college campus doesn't know how to lead somebody into following Jesus effectively. But we've seen those guys, right? I'm not describing everybody. I'm describing some people, and they're not displaying the fruit of the Spirit. And however you do it, if it's street preaching, praise God. I'm glad you're out there doing it. I might want to join you at some point. If I have the time, if I'm in the right place, if that's an effective form of evangelism where you live, I'm on board. I live in a place, if you got on the side of the freeway and started, trying to preach the gospel, it wouldn't work because everybody's just moving on by. So, I'm open to all kinds of ways. The way I do it, the way you do it, the way other people do it, it's all good. Just make sure that the fruit of the Spirit is on display.
I think that's the most important thing. And also too, there's a time and a place. There is, I tell people, so I do have an inner Christopher Hitchens that resides in me that can be quite sharp-tongued. Right? I'm very capable. I know what I'm capable of doing. And I always pray to God, Lord, I don't want that. I don't want Christopher Hitchens to come out of me sometimes, but I said that, but then there are other times when you do have to be firm and you do have to be corrective and you maybe do have to be a little hard on somebody when the situation warrants itself. That's also appropriate too. But if you're just using one tool and that's the only one you're using, no matter what, that's not going to work either. So I think it's important to have this toolbox of different ways and different approaches to handle these things. But I also think the most important thing is go to God and ask for guidance, and also allow the Holy Spirit to operate through you. That's the most important thing. And don't let this up here, the natural man who has this inclination to want to be right, to want to convert them and show them where they're wrong. That's actually works. Because when you start thinking that you have to convert people, you've lost the whole point of this whole thing. You don't do any converting. He does the converting. And that's the most important thing. When people try to put themselves between that, now that's not good. That's not good at all. And that's counterproductive big time to bringing people to Christ and sharing the gospel in a loving Christian way. Would you agree?
Yeah. I heard somebody say that it takes the average convert 7 conversations to find their way to Jesus. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know who's done it, but whether it's true or not, it's kind of mostly true, maybe. And that has taken some pressure off of me to feel like I need to present all 4 spiritual. What is it?
Fruits of Spirit.
It's the Campus Crusade method. The 4 spiritual truths.
Okay.
I don't need to present the whole gospel to somebody in a 45-second conversation. If I just get one of those things to somebody, then there's 6 other people who are going to have a conversation somewhere else. Like you said, the Holy Spirit's working through all of the Christians all over the world. You don't know what he's doing. You don't need to necessarily lead somebody to Christ in that one conversation you have with them when somebody comes to your door or when you meet somebody on the street corner. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't at some times give a whole gospel presentation. There are times and places to do it, but you don't have to. The Holy Spirit's in charge of converting people, and you are his tool. He's not yours.
Yeah, I agree. That's the thing. Like I attend conferences, and I went to Sunstone last year, and that was, most of the conferences I go to are scholarly, but the Sunstone was more of a fan convention. And it was interesting because and this was a year ago when my channel was much smaller than it is now, but a lot of people recognized me and told me how much of an impact the channel's had on their lives, that it's spiritually, it's been very helpful to them. I'm just like, really? I had no idea. But one of the things I just kept on going to people as they're coming to me and talking to me, and I would just go to say, I love you. I'd end the conversation with, I love you. And I think that's the most important thing, just to let people know they're loved. And, you could see sometimes the shock in their eyes when I'd say that, but then you'd see the recognition and say, wow, well, thank you. I love you too. Or I appreciate that. And I think that's the key thing, is just to tell people you love them. That's the gospel. And that, that's what it's all about, is showing love to people, especially who've been hurt and wounded. And a lot of those people were hurt and wounded, and they needed to hear somebody say, I love you. And I think that's the essence of what we're supposed to do, is spread the love, man, and then see where it goes. And then you just do your part. We're all broken vessels, dude. He'll use whatever broken vessel is afforded to him. Just make sure you're available, and he will use you. That's so awesome. Hey, I wanted to ask you, first of all, you actually have another podcast. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that question. So yes, I have a podcast called The Wrong Podcast. You can find it at thewrongpodcast.com.
Okay.
And it's just a place where I talk about politics, religion, culture, sports, pretty much anything you're not allowed to talk about in the flag company. And if you like my voice, if you think I'm compelling, come hear what else I have to say about everything else in the world. My next episode, I'm actually, so because of my knowledge of the LDS faith and Mormonism, sometimes that sneaks in. And this next episode, I'm going to be talking about the future of polygamy in America.
Oh,
and you for sure can't talk about the future of polygamy in America without talking about the past of polygamy in America.
okay. Well, that sounds fascinating. I like that. The future of polygamy in America. And actually, I think the future, if you're a proponent of polygamy, the future looks quite bright, I'd have to say, right?
I would say that whether you're a proponent or a detractor of polygamy in America, you should expect to see a lot more polygamy in America.
I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah, just be expectant of that.
Exactly. So I do have, you're a transplant from Southern California, and I noticed you got all these California Angels people behind you and bobbleheads. And
right.
How did you become California Angels or Los Angeles Angels or the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim or whatever name they go by these days?
They are only the Los Angeles Angels now. They dropped the of Anaheim a number of years ago, fortunately. So I live in Southern California and I love baseball. I grew up as a Kansas City Royals fan, but it was very, very hard to be a Kansas City Royals fan for very, very many years. And I had this great team here locally, 20 minutes from my house. And eventually I decided, wherever you live, it's always easiest to root for the baseball team closest to you. They're on the TV, they're on the radio. And behind me, I have every single bobblehead the Angels have ever given away at the stadium. This is 21, 22 years of bobbleheads. Here's a Mike Trout bobblehead. So yeah, this is the inheritance, man, right here.
Well, you get to watch Ohtani and Trout, two of the best players in baseball, two of the best all time,
right?
Every day. Now I'm hearing that the Cubs, my Cubbies, Chicago Cubs, I know Cubbies is derisive a little bit. They're kind of viewed as front runners to maybe land him next year in free agency. So maybe you want to become a Cubs fan at that point. Well, of course, you're from Missouri. There's no way you'd ever become a Cubs fan.
I'm actually from Oklahoma, but yes, rooting for Trout and Ohtani is a blessing and a curse because, like, not just one of them, but one of the two of them might go down in history as the greatest baseball player of all time.
Yep.
Like, I'm not joking. It will either be Mike Trout or Shohei Ohtani. They are amazing. You see them do things that no baseball player has ever done before, and yet the Angels can't make the playoffs.
I know.
And it's like, what is going on? Like, I'm not kidding, Steve. Like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I had a nightmare that I was working for the Angels front office, and I was trying to convince them to trade away all of the minor leaguers to fix the bullpen. And I woke up, I'm like, I'm almost 50 years old. Why am I having dreams about how to fix a baseball team? Like, I shouldn't be this invested, but when you have the two greatest players of all time on your team, it's hard not to be invested.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I really admire you. And I do have one more observation. What I find so fascinating with a lot within the culture of the people of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that many of them, first of all, they're all big Disney fans. They're also really, really into comic books. I find that comic book analogies make their way into conversations, whether it's John DeLynn on Mormon Stories or Radio Free Mormon. They always go back to comic books, and it plays such an important role in that culture. And I noticed you have a Flash statue back there. So are you a comic book guy yourself too?
So I'm sort of a comic book guy. I also have a Green Lantern. I don't know if you can get there. But I'm a graphic designer, and my own personal logo, I incorporated Green Lantern's logo and Flash's logo because I call myself a graphic design hero. And the Flash works really fast, and Green Lantern uses his creativity for good. And that's kind of what I am when I work. So that's why I have those two guys there. They're my inspiration for my profession.
Well, that's great. Well, what a great time I had talking to you today. Did you enjoy the conversation?
I loved it. Yeah. Anytime anybody wants to talk about Jesus with me, I'm on board.
I love it. And what do you folks tell us what you think? LDS, evangelicals, atheists, I'd like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this conversation that we had today? What are your thoughts about evangelicalism and what Tim has done in his life story? I find it to be very, very fascinating in his observations. And I'm sure those of you are going to push back and disagree with maybe some stuff I said and Tim said. I'm grateful when I do get criticism, because I know that, hey, people are at least watching the show and they're engaging us in the conversation. That's what this is all about, is civil conversations with people from different camps that don't agree with each other, but we can find the commonalities. And I always say, let's just center it all back on Jesus. Let's talk about Jesus together. And that's how it is. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it too.
So I just want to remind you, book drawing, enter into the description. For those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, there'll be links to both Patreon as well as PayPal. And do not forget the merch store, MormonBookReviews.com. We got hot chocolate mugs, not coffee mugs, they're hot chocolate mugs, ball caps, t-shirts, you name it, it's there. And I want to thank those of you who are supporting the channel. And just remember, the most important thing is this, folks. All the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.